Thank you very much. For those who don't know me, I am Howard Benbrook, and it's my pleasure to introduce Paul Cullen, who's probably the most recognizable guest we've ever had. Believe it or not, Paul is going to talk about surnames. He's an associate, a research associate with the now famous Family Names in the UK project, which is run out of the University of West England. They're going to publish, I think, in 2015, is that right, Paul? Oh, yes, all right. Somebody else's decision. Okay. Paul, I know from his resume, you'll all seen his little description in the brochure, is very interested in the links between names and the countryside or the landscape. And he immediately reminded me when I read about him of a book I read quite a long time ago now by a lady called Margaret Gelling, who wrote a book called Signposts to the Past. I recommend you to have a look at it, because there's an awful lot of overlap between the content of that book and the work that we do on surnames, and especially the idea that surnames come from places, which you know perfectly well is something I've demonstrated many times now with Surname Atlas. And there's a link here to Paul's project, because they use Surname Atlas very actively within the project. So I think you'll probably see quite a lot of that in the next few minutes. I've left a picture up on screen. It was something of a surprise to Paul about 10 minutes ago, because one of the projects he's been working on quite extensively is a link between the name Thorpe and how it links to the landscape. So I thought, that's interesting. I wonder if we can pick out all the surnames ending in Thorpe, with and without an E, and also including Throp, and see what it looks like if I mapped it out. Here it is. That's what all the surnames in 1881 looked like, the ones, that is, that end in Thorpe. And without any more ado, I think I'd better introduce you to Paul Cullen. Please welcome him.
Good afternoon all, thank you for having me. Yes, a brief plug for the book. Thorpe's in a Changing Landscape does the same kind of thing with place names and comes up with a similar looking map. But we attempt to undermine slightly the rather simplistic view that Thorpe is simply a Scandinavian element that arrives with the Vikings, and as they settle and begin to farm, they use their native term, Thorpe, for a secondary settlement. It's more complicated than that, and I don't want to give the ending away, obviously, because I want you to rush out and buy a copy. But first consideration, what were the Anglo-Saxons doing, naming things in Thorpe in the mid-9th century before the Scandinavians settled then? And why do Thorpes, when mapped, continue in this thin, sort of attenuated tail all the way down to the far southwest? That's not traditional Scandinavian settlement territory. But I better talk about surnames, because it's already 7 minutes past and I've got far too many slides. Shall I introduce the project? We're getting bigger and bigger there. I hope the slides fit on. All right, well, I'll talk over that anyway. The Family Names of the UK project has the ghastly acronym FANUC. I wasn't asked for an opinion about that, but I'll call it FANUC anyway. I'm going to have a few boring slides with some statistics, get them out of the way, and then talk about some surnames. So, shall I say click each time? I haven't got a zapper. I'm going to do an imaginary zap. Oh dear.
Give me 2 seconds.
Yeah. Quick pause. I know, I could name the people on the project, couldn't I? Professor Patrick Hanks, he's very pleased to be a professor now. He would have loved to have been here today, by the way. This isn't a snub, you've got me instead, he just couldn't make it. He's the project leader, along with Professor Richard Coates, who, a double professor, he's Professor of Linguistics and Onomastics at the University of the West of England. And then we've had a variety of research assistants. I'm the only one who's stuck with it. Simon Draper, I think he enjoyed himself, but he went back to his natural home at the Victoria County History in Oxfordshire when a job came up. We've had Duncan Probert for a while, who worked on a project called Profile of a Doomed Elite. looking prosopographically at the people of Domesday Book, and he's gone back to do more of that, looking at 11th century bynames. Ah, good. I can stop waffling about us now. We also had a very good PhD student, Harry Parkin, who's just passed. So there you go, we're pleased with that. Okay, next slide then, please. Ah, all right. Aney and Wilson, it's now become. When I mention Rainey, I'll be talking about his dictionary, the Dictionary of English Surnames, which is in effect Rainey's Dictionary of British Surnames, expanded and vandalised by Richard Wilson. Wilson really didn't know what he was doing. He added rather a lot of non-existent surnames, frankly. If he found something in a medieval document and liked the look of it, despite the fact there's no evidence it was hereditary and hadn't been recorded for 500 years, he thought, oh yeah, dog's tooth, that's good, and he stuck it in the dictionary. And he also inserted rather a lot of the kind of names that Rainey had been forced to leave out for publication cost reasons, as far as I know. OUP had rather limited and cut down the number of entries Rainey was allowed, and one of the types of name that he'd chosen to leave out if something had to go was the kind of name like Tewkesbury that was considered blindingly obvious. If someone's called Tewkesbury, they can probably guess it's from Tewkesbury, so that went by the by. Something had to go, as I say, but it's sad to have lost so many of those names. When Wilson was then allowed to increase the number of entries, many of those locative names then found their way into the new edition, but Rainey was a place name scholar and Wilson wasn't, and they're really very badly done indeed, and it's a shame to see Rainey cited and accused of getting so much wrong, really, when in fact it was Wilson's work. That's probably enough slander. That's all right. Well, we can get by with a few words missing. Oh yeah. Oh, brilliant, I can zap. Oh, happiness. Ah, hooray. Every cloud. I can zap. PowerPoint. But, I don't know. I didn't know I was saving at high res. I just pressed save. That looks promising. F5. Yay! Okay. Right. Well, thank you very much. Off I go. Let's see, where do I aim the zap? Ah, we're laughing. Right, okay, we've done Rainey. Found it very, very briefly. Rainey was our starting point, so any entry in Rainey gets into the FANUC database. A cut-off, rather arbitrarily chosen, of any name with 100 bearers in the 1997 census gets in. That just happened to be the data that we had to hand. We try our best to explain names, but sometimes you just have to admit to being befuddled. We've also got some rarer names in for various reasons. They've been sucked out of the reserve list. The total number of entries at the moment is 45,000. 19,500 of those are main entries. 27,000 odd are variants. The maths doesn't work because a name can be a main entry in its own right and also a variant of another form. An awful lot of individual forms of surnames are simply variants of others. Simply is not the right word, as we will find out, of course. Now, Rainey and Wilson is our starting point for, I suppose, the obvious reason that it gives some early bearers. There are many surname dictionaries out there where you have to take everything on trust. Rainey at least presents some evidence. How relevant that evidence is to the head form to which he assigns it is a recurring problem. And one of the jobs that we've had on the FANUC project has been to plug that yawning gap between the one or two medieval bearers given by Rainey, a present-day surname, and very often you find the connection is completely wrong. But still, at least we had a starting point. But what we've done is add an awful lot of material using the 200,000 odd names in Carolyn Fenwick's edition of the late 14th century poll taxes, for instance, which we've now got in electronic form. That's a very useful research tool. Almost using in order of descending ease electronic versions of feet of fines and patent rolls and so on. Lots of documents from the National Archives, Prob 11 and Chancery Roll stuff, and validation was not easy. I'm sure you've all got your own experience of the Mormon's IGI. There's a lot of useful stuff there, but it must be treated with a great deal of caution. So we went through lots of rigorous validation exercises to produce material as reliable as we could get it, really. And very quickly, there's a lot of Irish stuff in there, over 5,000, based on the the works of Wolfe and MacLysett, but this time with some proper early bearers. A lot of material has been extracted from a machine-readable version of the Elizabethan fiants. We wouldn't be able to work at the scale we're working at without having machine-readable sources. Lots of Scottish names where black is our chief source, but we've got consultants in all these areas who are doing as much augmenting and correction as they've got time for, really. And the list of consultants for the recent immigrant names is enormous. It has to be, because I get employed as a medievalist. I can't possibly explain half of the recent immigrant names. Okay, last of the boring slides, I hope. We've almost finished FANUC 1. It officially ended on the last day of March. We've got some stragglers in the letter W, which is a very large letter, as all lexicographers know, but we're 96% done, genuinely. The delay is that OUP now, to our surprise, we thought that they were, on our heels, really, eager to get it out. They've asked for 2 years to copy, edit, and produce the thing. So publication is not at all imminent. Now, there's a long paragraph there explaining that, yes, we can't release the whole database, but we're more than happy to discuss individual names or batches of names with anyone who comes to us with a query or request or information. So, sorry you don't get the lot yet, though. The good news is that we've just got continuation funding for another 2 years, 9 months. So I'm employed till Christmas 2016 to do FANUC 2. We didn't get a new acronym, sadly, which is... feels exactly the same, but looking at lower numbers, really. The idea is to lower that 100-bearer cut-off down to 20, which brings in, we think, about 15,000 established names that are there in 1881, still around in 1997. It just gives us a lot more names to play with. A large number of those are, of course, going to end up being variants of names already in the database, but there's a very, very large number out there which are surnames that have never been tackled before, by and large. So good, more fun for me. Right then, a long time ago, Henry Guppy, who seems to have no eyes, was way ahead of us, really. Rainey was aware of him, but they had rather different approaches. In 1890, he produced a book which is now readily available online. Just go to the Internet Archive. It's well worth a look. Homes of Family Names in Great Britain, because he was convinced, and rightly so, that names have an association with places. His terminology is interesting. In gazetteer style, he lists peculiar names. He has various categories of name. He includes some names which are peculiar to more than one county, but I'm just going to flash before your eyes. You won't have time to read it, but I'll revisit as many as I can. I'll flash before you the 89 peculiar names of Kent, simply because we're in Kent and I have to talk about something. Right, they don't quite fit on. Don't worry about that too much, because I'll come back to those. What you will see is that in some cases he goes a step lower, a degree of granularity at sort of the level of towns, really. So some names get in brackets after them their distinctive distributional place. I look at that and it's rather like hearing my old school register read out to me. Now, what I'm going to do now, I imagine almost all of you, possibly all of you, will know of Steve Archer's 19th century surname atlas. Every home should have one. I'm not on commission, it's just a wonderful thing to have. What I'm going to attempt to do, I haven't had time to get the statistics in for every single surname, but where I've done it, I give you the total number of bearers in 1881. So for Neame, that's 292. The number of those in Kent, 200, and a percentage. So 68% of the Neames in 1881 are to be found in Kent. Now, Guppy's methodology, I believe, was he wasn't simply looking through trade directories. He had an idea that farmers were the most stay-at-home kind of people, that their names wouldn't have gone wandering. So he aimed to, I mean, he's not entirely right in this respect. It was the same thought that went into the Survey of English Dialects under Orton at Leeds, actually, where they went looking for what they called norms, N-O-R-M-S, which were something like non-mobile older rural males or something. I can't remember the acronym, but they're looking for stay-at-home people who talk the real dialect and whose surnames are unvarying, apparently. He clearly picked up a good number of brewers as well, though, so I'll give you a couple to begin with. I'm going to mostly talk about locative names, but just to admit that there are other kinds of name out there which can have just as much of a tight regional distribution. Here's a relationship name, Neame, resulting from the misdivision of Middle English Amer, uncle, with a preceding N, presumably mine eam, just like mine uncle produces Shakespeare's nuncle and so on. Then another, now lost brewery, sadly, Rigdon, is another type of relationship name, a patronymic, where without the addition of a possessive S, without the addition of son, simply the surname represents the first name. So it's the equivalent of Edward or John or something being used as a surname, a typical southern form. There are distributions here where son is broadly speaking more northern, S is broadly speaking more western. Rainey's explanation, Riccarden, a diminutive of Rickard, AR weakened to E and lost, is a bit long-winded. We really don't need that. Much, much simpler is to have the short form Rick, a diminutive suffix D, you get it Dord for Ralph as well, and then a second diminutive suffix un, so a double diminutive. I say it's simpler, it sounds more complicated, but phonologically it's simpler. And you get exactly the same thing, a rhyming form with Higden as well. You'll all know the rhyming sequence, Rick, Dick, Hick, Rog, Dodge, Hodge, Rob, Dob, Hob, and so on. Middle English hyperchoristic or pet forms work in very systematic ways. Meg, Peg, and so on. Mol, Pol. I was struggling to think of another one then. Okay, what you can also do with Archer is get down to the level of poor law union. So we don't quite get down to parish level, but poor law union is very useful indeed. So Rigdon, my grandmother's maiden name, is not simply very Kentish, it's very East Kentish, and Blean poor law union shows up in black accordingly. What we can also say is that using Archer as a tool, we can evaluate the plausibilities of multiple explanations offered by Rainey. So under Goodhue, for instance, Rainey suggests a patronym from an Old Norse personal name, Guthhugi, or a Middle English nickname meaning good servant, Gordhua. That distribution does not suggest Old Norse origin in the least. I would say our 11th century bearer in Suffolk is irrelevant to the surname as it shows up nowadays in Kent. Now, one of the names that Guppy had given a precise location for is Swaffer, which he described as an Ashford name. This is one that's in Rainey's dictionary. It derives from a place name earlier, Swatford, now surviving as Swatfield, just down the road from here, next to the William Harvey Hospital. Swatfield Bridge is still on the map. And with a handy remnant of the final D there in Robert Swafford, 1549, we can agree happily with the derivation there. And to just prove how on the ball Guppy could be, Ashford, I can't remember if that's if it's called Ashford Poor Law Union, but that's pretty much Ashford highlighted there, shows that the Swaffers have not exactly wandered far from home. Now, sometimes you put in a name from Guppy's list and find a rather startling result. What was he thinking? Benstead at 3% is not the most Kentish of surnames, let alone peculiar. There are plenty of places called Benstead. You would expect it to be a surname of multiple origin, if you like, but Kent is hardly a hotspot. Well, as I'm sure you've discovered in your own researches, what a difference a spelling makes. Take the A out, Benstead, ED at the end is extremely Kentish. Well, Kentish and Surrey, as it shows up there. What candidate would we offer? Well, for Kent, I would suggest it's Benstead in Hunton, which is well recorded as a byname in the medieval period. I haven't attempted to link that up to the modern name, but it looks a plausible candidate. But probably also Banstead in Surrey would have played a part, and is evidenced in Kent from early on as well. I should think both are going on. Then I just, all I can say with Guppy's listing of Thurkel, a very County Durham surname as peculiarly Kentish, is on the one hand, he's right, there's something going on. 9% in Kent raises an eyebrow, I suppose. But here he's victim of having a small statistical sample and nothing more than that. And one of the advantages that we've got, of course, is that we have very large statistical samples to play with. For instance, Steve Archer's mapping of the 1881 census. Now then, to show you a name that is very, very well behaved, I give you Brenchley, in that there's only one candidate, as far as I know, one place in England called Brenchley, that's in Kent. The surname is very Kentish indeed, hasn't gone anywhere. The modern surname matches exactly the spelling of the place name, there's no divergence. The earliest recorded bearers have a locative preposition, de Brenchley, and are taxed in Brenchley 100. If every surname behaved like Brenchley, what a tedious hobby we would have. No offence to any Brenchleys in the room, but obviously most surnames don't behave like that, else life would be too simple. Now, I'm not picking on wholeness, of course, but an example here, I rather like this one because, first of all, Rainey quite rarely says something about distribution and allows it to influence his choice, if you like. And also it's a nice example of a locative surname that survives when the place name that gave rise to it has vanished. So although Rainey knows that there's a place on the modern map called Holnist in Dorset, he acknowledges that the surname is a Kentish and Sussex one, so he suggests, correctly, that the surname is more likely to come from a now lost place in Smarden parish, recorded as Holmhurst. And the early spellings of the surname and the place name coincide beautifully, and they're in the right part of Kent even, though I haven't put that information up there. So yes, case solved, well done, Rainey. But he doesn't always do that. For the surname Dibden, his early bearers are from Kent. He identifies a place called Dibden in Riverhead in Kent. It means deep valley, and there are many, many, many deep valleys out there. I mean, places called Deep Valley, if you like. That distribution is distinctly Hampshire, and a better candidate is surely the parish of Dibden in Hampshire. This kind of stuff is very simple for us to do. Rainey didn't have Archer a click away, of course, but you'll find it again and again and again that the obvious candidate, I mean, in some cases Rainey knew this, the obvious candidate isn't the famous place. The Bradfords are not from the West Riding of Yorkshire, and so on. So, you know, case solved, you would say. I'm not trying to rule out the possibility that some modern Dibdens do come from other places, but the chief explanation of the surname has to look to Hampshire. Ransley is a similar case where the identifying of something as a variant of another name can look obvious but doesn't always work. I mean, it's something that we battle with constantly. Under the head form Rawnsley, Rainey suggests a place in Yorkshire, which does, and links Ransley as a variant, which does nothing to explain the Kentish distribution of Ransley. That's my great-granny Ransley there from Hawkhurst. A second candidate is needed, if you like, and we're looking at another lost place name, in this case in Chiddingston in Kent. Ransley, Rainsley, Rensley, and so on are the early forms. But for the head form itself, Rainey's fine. If I can just quickly show you where Rawnsley is very much West Riding of Yorkshire. So his entry works if you delete the variant. In some cases, he just hasn't spotted a place name. Hards is an obvious example if you know the villages of Kent, of course. Hard is simply listed as a variant of hard, the adjective hard by Rainey, with this excrescent S which plagues surname study. It needs a monograph, really. What is final S doing appearing on the end of lots of surnames relatively late in the day? But of course, to explain that distribution, an equally good candidate, I would claim better, would be a locative from the villages of Upper and Lower Hards in Kent. I'm learning to pronounce them with an H, because the early bearers are clearly locative and show exactly the same spellings as the place name. Occasionally, I have no idea what dear Percy Rainey was thinking. What the De Monte Begonis bearers that he's given us under Mungem have to do with the modern surname, I have no idea. I don't know where they come from, but I think they're red herrings, because the surname Mungem, and there are many variant spellings of that, is surely from Mungem in Kent. I can't even see how Mungem ties in with those early bearers, so I think that he was just having an off moment there. And I don't mean to just have a go at Rainey, but he's our starting point, so we have to iron out some of these problems. Oxspring is a slightly tricky one in that Rainey suggests it's from either Oxspring in Yorkshire or Ospringe in Kent. His earliest bearer is from Somerset. There's no explanation of how Richard fits in there. And then he's picked up something in Yorkshire, but there's not much happening in Kent. All we would add to the mix, I suppose, is that the Kentish Ospringe does give rise to a surname. We've got medieval bearers, but it appears to have died out. So for clarity's sake, we would acknowledge the existence of the surname, recorded up to the 14th century, but then, as there seems to be nothing more, presume that line, if you like, has gone. Sometimes all I want to do with Rainey is just take out one of his early bearers, so we do. We keep them in reserve with a comment, deleted bearer or something like that, so they are retrievable if necessary. But the earliest bearer under Oldham, de Alderham, is simply a spelling of Yaldham in Rootham parish in Kent. Or it's interesting to note that it gave rise to a byname, but it's got nothing to do with the Lancashire Oldhams, so we take it out. Sometimes, annoyingly, I hate these cases, you can say Rainey's wrong, but you can't offer anything in its stead. If someone can help me with this, I'd be delighted. The surname Winship has nothing to do with Wincheap, the suburb of Canterbury, but Rainey's early bearers do come from Wincheap in Canterbury. I don't believe for a second they've all gone up to Northumberland and County Durham. There's something local to County Durham that's given rise to that name that looks like Winshop and Winchup in early spellings. It may be locative, it may contain the element hop for a tucked away side valley. I haven't been able to identify a candidate, and I don't know for certain that it's locative. Any ideas would be welcome, but it's very disappointing to take away an explanation and not be able to give a better one. Now, there are also hundreds of names, of course, thousands of names that aren't in Rainey, and we're starting from scratch. And here is an example where it took a fair bit of tracking down because of the degree of divergence between the surname form and the place name, even though it survives on the modern map. Hartnup, which is very much around the Cranbrook area, when I first pick it up in the 16th century, looks like Hartnope. The modern Harton Oak, which has clearly undergone a degree of popular etymology on the map in adjacent Hawkhurst parish, is recorded relatively late too, in the 16th century, and looks like Harpinhope and Hartenope. I don't think it's too great a leap of faith to connect the two. Geographically, it's plausible. Formally, it's not too difficult to have simply lost the medial syllable. So with a little hedging, apparently from Hartenope, and by citing the place name forms as well to explain why we think it's plausible, that goes in as a tentative explanation for Hartnup. What I should really say, and what's presumably obvious by now, is that we're not doing genealogy, we're not doing family history, we're not trying to do more than show things are plausible because there's a geographical link. We're not making the links between generations at all. We're saying, look, we're in an adjacent parish, or look, we're in the right bit of the country, and here's some evidence. If at all possible, we're giving some early bearers from each century. But given 45,000 names, we can't possibly be doing any more precise work than that. So there will, of course, be plenty of cases where we get it wrong, and we'd be happy to be corrected. But I hope it's an improvement on that great gulf of many centuries, which is what we had in Rainey's dictionary. George Redmonds, who I'm sure many of you will know, works at a finer level than we can possibly do, specialising on one enormous, admittedly, county, Yorkshire. He has a term for it, pseudo-genealogy, in that he's making the links to the point of plausibility, but not doing the work of a family historian. Right, another example of not only a name that doesn't look like the place name that gave rise to it, but where the place name itself has vanished. So this is the problem of Holness and Hartnup rolled into one. Lancefield had me puzzled, but it's a very, very tight distribution. Crundale, over and over again, the early bearers are right from the 13th century Ralph de Lambesfeld through to the 17th century, what I presume is Lansfield, then with vowel lengthening becoming Launcefield, and so on. It has to be something local, and it's only by going through the rentals of Y Manor, which held this land in Crundle and the adjacent parish, that you discover this minor name, Lambesfeld. It's there in the right place. You can more or less point to it on the modern map around Soul Street, but there's been no trace of that place name since the 15th century. It survives disguised in the form of a surname. And there they are. There's Crundale on the map. There's the Poor Law Union. With such a tight distribution, what else can it be? There's no other candidate. But that was a devil to find. A nice example of how a member of the guild has helped us out enormously by doing the work for us and sending it to us. Thank you. Burville, as far as I know, isn't explained by Rainey. Sorry, I should have checked that. But it's clearly very Kentish, and there's something particularly East Kentish about it. Well, I looked at what our draft entry had been, and to my embarrassment, without any support whatsoever, the suggestion of a Norman locative name, very woolly indeed, had been offered for want of anything better. But no, we can rule that out. Dr. Peter Burville's one-name study, and his evidence is much more convincing than the paltry 3 names I've given you there. Don't worry, it ties together much better than that looks. He's demonstrated absolutely, plausibly, that Barville Farm in the parish of Tilmanston in East Kent is the origin. There's nothing French about this at all. It's one of the many examples where the generic element field, from Old English feld, takes on a French look and becomes ville. The voicing of the F to V in the middle is fine, the loss of final D is fine, and you end up with something that doesn't look at all like a field. But that's what it is, it's a bare field, and the early locative forms nail it. Right, I want to look at a few Kentish names that have gone on holiday. This isn't quite the Rochester kind of problem where like I said, with Bradford, for instance, where the dictionaries say it's from Rochester in Kent because it's a city and they've heard of it, and they don't know that there are 3 little farms in Northumberland called Rochester, which give rise to Rochester, and it's a Northumbrian surname and so on. This is a case where surely there's only one Canterbury, but that is not a Kentish name. It's very much a Dorset name, very much a West Dorset name. And there's the possibility, because it's Canterbury, I suppose, that we could be looking at a pilgrim name, as has been suggested for Rome, that someone has taken the pilgrimage and then gets named Canterbury because of it. I don't believe that for a second. Looking first of all at the early bearers, those locative prepositions, the de Canterburys, are surely of Canterbury, from Canterbury. I can't believe a pilgrim would be called of Canterbury in the same way. And look where they are. Well, yeah, our early bearers are in Canterbury itself. There is a Canterbury Lane in Canterbury named from the Canterbury family, which makes my head spin. Presumably they left to acquire the byname, else it's meaningless, and then returned. You can't just stay at home and get a name like that, can you? Anyway, what you notice about the early bearers, I think, Kingston upon Hull, Kings Lynn, and Bristol in particular, is presumably the route was maritime rather than overland. But you know, that's a throwaway line. I can't back it up. And that Dorset concentration I can find no evidence for before the 16th century. They may well be there earlier, but in the poll tax there's no de Canterbury in Dorset, so it looks relatively late. Excuse me. Right then, Maidstone. There's only one town called Maidstone, as far as I know, and so I'm regarding this as another Kentish name gone a-wandering. And again, Norfolk, Gloucestershire, looks a little maritime, doesn't it? And our early bearers in Kent, I give you the Kent list first of all, show the range of spellings that we expect for Maidstone. Some N forms, Maid-End Stone, loss of N, and quite a lot of A's in the final syllable because it's from Old English starn, stone. It's not a tune town name. Where are they when they go wandering? They're very early in Norfolk indeed. That doesn't demonstrate continuity, but the Maidstones are found in Norfolk in the 13th century, and Bristol, our first 2 bearers, are exactly where the modern surname distribution is now. And then all over the place, and I give you a variety of spellings. The one I want to point to in particular is the penultimate Andrew Mayston, fishmonger in the Freeman of Lynn in Norfolk, who appears, it's the same chap, he has an apprentice the second time round, so he's obviously, it works, he's the right age gap. He's Maidstone when secondly recorded and Mayston in the first, and those kind of variations can be very important clues, or red herrings. But I'm going to take him seriously and suggest that the distribution of Mayston ties in well enough in East Anglia to plausibly be explained as perhaps a variant of Maidstone. And for want of a better candidate, I think it's probably a goer. There is a potential spanner in the works, although I think it's vanishingly unlikely that it plays a part in surname formation. In the 11th century, there is a place called Mayston, which later historians call Maidstone, in Felixstowe. It could play a part, but as it appears not to be documented later than Domesday Book, as I say, it's not very likely to have given rise to a surname. Could happen. Right, and now I want to look at some intruders, starting with a very, very simple one. Lackford has a Kentish distribution nowadays. There's no Lackford in Kent, presuming that it is a locative. Where is Lackford? I only know of one Lackford. Lackford in Suffolk. Early bearers in Suffolk in the poll tax. No sign in Kent before the 18th century. Cropping up in Essex in the 17th. What else could it be, really? It's hardly case solved. I'm not demonstrating that the Kentish surname has to be from Suffolk, but surely, for want of anything else, that's a sensible enough entry. Then, there are examples that look simple, but throw up a neat little surprise. Exeter, for instance, very much a Kentish name, very, very light shading in Cornwall, admittedly, but absent from Devon. But it has to be from Exeter, doesn't it? Ha-ha! Add an H. H is come, H is go. Yes. Are the people of Devon ashamed of Exeter? What? Who are they trying to kid? But that's what's happened to the name when it stayed at home. It's parted ways from the place name in a way that it hasn't done, unusually. It's usually the other way around. It's stayed faithful to the place name spelling in Kent. Isn't that nice? It's like the people of Southall pronouncing it Southwell. It's the wrong way round. It's no good shaking them, I've tried. So what's going on? The early bearers are clearly locative. They're recorded in Devon. It's gone east early, to Exeter in Essex in 1272, and it's there in Canterbury in the poll tax. And the H form, I can't find it before the 17th century, and it's there in Devon. So it looks pretty safe, I'd have thought. I mean, I realise it involves the loss of the medial syllable as well, but that's what happens. Worcester, Leicester, and so on. Now, I'm giving myself another 5 minutes, if I may, at least, but shout at me when it goes wrong. Now for some mysteries which I'm just going to throw at you and see what you think. This is my attempt at showing you a bit of the sort of pseudo-genealogy, if you like. One thing that George Redmond has noticed a lot is that the degree of change and obfuscation increases when you get out of the county, and as soon as you land in foreign shires, in places, particularly this is true with locative names, in places that don't know that place name that you're bringing with you, then they get mangled and all kinds of things happen. So working on that principle, if it is a principle, that names from outside can become heavily disguised, my first thought with Dunmore is, that's not anything I recognise in Kent. Dunmill is presumably a variant of the same thing. And although the very local distributions are slightly different, we've got something going on in West Kent. You were probably way ahead of me here. There is a distribution of Dunmow to take into account in Essex. I chuck that into the mix and suggest, given that array of early-ish bearers, that we're looking at a locative from Dunmow, Great and Little, in Essex, which clearly gives rise to a byname, de Dunmow, in Essex in 1119, shows up in 1466 in just the right bit of Kent, in Sundridge parish, Thomas Dunmow. Then, in the adjacent parish of Ainsford, we get this name appearing in the 16th century with an L, Dunmall, Dunmoll, Dunmal, and so on. And you immediately think, oh, right, that's solved then, because the alternation of final W, final L, is something that recurs time and time again in many a language and many a dialect. I suffer from it horribly. I can't say my own name. I'm Paul. Apparently there's an L at the end of that. My poor dad, he's called Al. Just sounds like he's in pain when he introduces himself. But the Anglo-Normans struggled with it just as much. It's not simply a Del Boy phenomenon. And Bristol, for instance, the Bridgestow is a nice example. They still have this thing called the Bristol L, where they've got a great ideal. I'll go to Americal. No, maybe I'll shop at IKEA. It's fantastic. Love it. Yeah, still very active. Date IKEA as a formation. Brilliant. Anyway, case solved, Your Honour. Tapsall, on the other hand, my immediate thought wasn't to look at other counties, but to think, oh, that's probably that very Kentish place name element, Sealer, meaning a muddy pool, a wallowing place, as in the parish of Seal, for instance. Or possibly it is a term for a pigsty, basically, Yesel, or a cluster of a fold for animals, something like that. But I just could not find one, not even down to the level of field names. Tapsall as well, spelt with an A, with a similar distribution. Once you start... right, here's a little aside. It's not this, but it did cross my mind. Could topsail, the topsail of a ship, possibly give rise to this surname? There's one intriguing glimpse of what looks like this word being used as a byname in the 14th century patent rolls, but I have no idea where Vincent might be from. I suspect he's not even English. But to be honest, we throw him into the mix as a possible contender. But I'm getting back to disguised place names again. Topsfield has a South Essex distribution, and there is the parish of Topsfield, well recorded as a byname in Essex. If that goes a-wandering, what happens? Just as with Burville, we lose the final D. In the consonant cluster, PSF, something has to go. The F goes. And so to get from Topsfield to Topsail, tapsel with dialect unrounding of O to A, very, very common indeed, where you get craft for croft and so on like that. Arter for otter, I particularly like otter spelled A-F-T-E-R. Then you get your tapsels. And in fact, in the 1334 subsidy roll, we've got a John Topsfield assessed in the right part of Kent. So I'm assuming that development has only happened in Kent, and Topsfield, without being disguised, has remained in Essex. Mepstead, I was getting carried away here, looking to Essex for everything. I couldn't find a Mepstead, Mapstead, anything like that in Kent, but I knew there was a Maplestead in Essex. Turn to the place names of Essex and find, right, yes, it loses its medial syllable in at least one early spelling. We get Mapstead. More Essex intruders. There it is with a variant spelling. But no. What we've got instead, when you start collecting your 16th and 17th century bearers, is some alternation going on, or extraordinary coincidence, but presuming that we're looking at the same name, between P and what comes out as X or KS. The Mapsteads, Maxsteads, and Mepsteads are coexisting. And if we look at the distribution of Maxstead, that is a very Kentish name. And the nice thing about it is that we can identify its origin. There's a Maxstead Street, the name of a hamlet in Elmstead in East Kent, which clearly gives rise to a locative surname. And there are a few more nice clear bearers, even down to the parish. There's no doubt that the Maxsteads and Mexsteads are there in Elmstead. So that P would appear to be a late variation, that's all. So no need to look to Essex at all. Just a couple of examples. Sorry, a couple more minutes, is that all right? Yeah, thanks. This one, on the face of it, looks baffling. What on earth is Huckstep? Someone hobbling along. It takes 2 minutes to check the place names of Sussex and find that we've got an intruder from the Sussex side of the border, a locative from a place called Hucksteep, surviving just as the name of a wood in Mountfield parish. What I suppose comes out of this is that when it comes to cracking locative names, if that name comes from a county for which there is an English Place Name Society volume, you've got a fairly good chance of solving it. Where there are black holes, like Somerset and much of County Durham, you're in a pickle. Because of course you can look at a modern gazetteer or map, but without the early spellings of the place name to tie in with the early forms of the surname, there's far too much guesswork involved. Sometimes, of course, the variation shows up in some surprising ways. I haven't given you any early forms for this one, but please take it on trust that Pegden Farm in Linfield gives rise to the surname Pegden, which is particularly Kentish now. Where it's stayed at home in Sussex, it has the form Pagden, and when it's gone wandering further afield into Oxfordshire, it's become Pigden, and that's absolutely typical, that kind of patterning. Right. That looks very much like it's going to be a Wealden place name. The distribution straddles the Kent and Sussex boundary, Hurst country. If it's not a Hurst, it's a Den. If it's not a Den, it's a Hurst. But where is Pankhurst? Red herring entirely. Up the wrong tree we were barking. Pentecost, also a Kentish and Sussex surname, but found in the southwest too, is a relationship name from a personal name, Pentecost. It is Pentecost, used as a personal name. There it is recorded as a given name, Pentecost of Oxford. And Geoffrey, son of Pentecost, makes it pretty clear. If you look at the early spellings, mostly in the southeast there, but one from Devon in 1590 to show you what's going on down there. In the southwest, Pentecost has remained as Pentecost. In the southeast, it's become disguised as if it's a Hurst name. So again, this is more of that pseudo-genealogy stuff, isn't it? Where it's not until 1622 that it finally takes the plunge and comes out as a Hurst. Okay, this is rounding up my last couple of slides. The second edition of Steve Archer's surname atlas introduced a feature which is enormous fun. You can squander hours on this. It's the County Surnames tab. Glad you found it. You choose your county. It's good, isn't it? It's the tip of the iceberg. He could do anything with this. He's set a certain number of thresholds. They're arbitrary. He's only done it for county level, not poor or union. Of course, he could do more. We have to let him know there's a demand. That's the thing. Everyone write to Steve Archer and say, more toys to play with, please. But here, Kent, threshold of 100. You get the first names kicking in at 93% of the bearers are to be found in Kent. This is even more like the school register than Guppy's list. It's quite unsettling, really. I'm not going to talk through these names at all. I just want to show you what you can do that bring the threshold down to 50 and you think, I've never heard of half of those. Bring it down to 10 and I'm not sure you're learning very much, though Bonham Castle was a surprise. But up it, and it's wonderful to see how many of these names are on Guppy's list and hitting pretty high percentages as well. There are some counties where this works less well. Rutland, for instance, for obvious statistical reasons. But it's interesting to see that there are many more inward-looking counties than Kent, where at the threshold of 500, you'll get 100% bearers within that county. Counties are, of course, of enormously varying sizes, but still, playing with it throws up all kinds of potentially interesting insights. Right, I must speed up, I'm almost there. Even when you take it up to 1,000 bearers, still 83% of the Hogbans are in Kent. What would Guppy have made of such a tool? That's it, I shall stop. Thank you.
Well, I don't know about you, but I found that absolutely fascinating. I've got 1,000,001 questions I want to put, but I think it's your turn. Can we have some questions, please? It's Roy Stockdill.
I can give you two classic examples of where Guppy and Rainey got it not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. Guppy said that I'm a Stockdale actually, that I do Stockdale one-name study. Guppy said for some reason that I could never understand that Stockdale was found in Cambridgeshire. It was the name of Cambridgeshire. How he could have failed to notice that there were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of Stockdales in Yorkshire is quite beyond me, basically, because that is the home of the name. You know, Archer's Sermon Atlas will show that. The other one where Rainey got it also spectacularly wrong is in the name Shackleton. And I have some Shackleton ancestry. In fact, it's my sole claim to fame that I'm a 12th cousin, 8 times removed, of Sir Ernest Shackleton. Proven by documentation. Wow, you know. Rainey attributed the name Shackleton to a place in North Yorkshire called Scattleton, which is a load of utter balderdash. He could only have been making a leap in the dark and guessing, because I'm a great devotee of George Redmond's, like you. I've been an admirer and, well, sort of friend for years. He attributes Shackleton quite plainly to a hamlet in the Calder Valley above Hebden Bridge called Shackletonstall, near Heptonstall. And it seems likely that the origin of the name was probably one couple, and they ramified into Bradford, Howth, Keighley, etc. So that's two examples for you of where both Guppy and Rainey got it very, very wrong indeed.
Well, and it's nice to hear those. With Guppy, I'm sure it's just that he had a very small sample. So a single statistical blip, one single farmer in Cambridgeshire would be enough for him to regard that as peculiar, I think. And yeah, when it comes to Rainey, I always check both editions, because it's usually not Rainey, it's usually Wilson who's put something in like that and probably come up with the wrong Shackleton. Occasionally it's Rainey, and all I can say is I wish we had a George Redmond's for every county, because the level of work and the lifetime that he's put into it has produced fabulous results. But there's only one George. Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. We've got Penelope Burton, whose study name is Quested.
Thank you. I'm just ever so disappointed that you haven't given us your take on Quested, the earliest form Dirkwersted,
because
especially as they come from right round here, 3 miles away. Perhaps I can talk to you afterwards about your take on that.
I'd love to. I have to speak again at 2 o'clock in Maidstone, so I'm going to very rudely run away, I'm afraid. But Quested, I have looked into it, and I am genuinely puzzled by it. I really don't know the source. It's clearly locative, but whether it is from a lost place in Kent or it's from outside Kent,
We've done a little bit on that, and I'm sure you've got all the very earliest from 1280, 1340 that we've got. Can I email you or something?
Yes, please do.
Can you leave your address, please?
I will do. Well, all the organisers have my email address.
Cool. Yep. Thank you very much.
I think we've got time for just one more before tummies start rumbling. Victor Medlock.
Hi, Paul. You mentioned the term dialect unrounding.
I did.
When it's A to E change.
No, it's O to A is unrounding. The rounded O, if you do your best West Country farmer voice, you will end up with it. It becomes unrounded to an A. So croft becomes craft. There's just less rounding of the mouth.
I see, yeah.
So it was topsail, wasn't it? Top becomes tap.
Yeah. Okay, because around 1750, the name Madlock became Medlock, I think it was because of association with the River Medlock in Manchester, but the Madlocks don't come from that area; they came from Cambridgeshire.
Yeah, I would agree with your analysis then. That's not a common dialect change, and it's not unrounding certainly, but contamination from a similar name, such as the Medlock.
That's a good word to use, contamination.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just made that up. I'm not sure if that counts as a technical term in linguistics or not, but we'll go with it, yeah.
Okay.
That's a bit dirty though, isn't it? Contamination. we'll work on that. Influence. Yeah. It's been led astray.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's just coming up to 1 o'clock. So I'll bring this to a close. I'd just like to invite you all to thank Paul for his wonderful contribution to the study.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul.